I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to place a duty on the Secretary of State to enter into negotiations with the European Union to agree a customs union between the United Kingdom and the European Union and for united purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, up and down the country, businesses know it. The public feel it, and it's time that this House find the courage to lift our whispered voices and admit it. Brexit has been an abject economic failure. It's choked business investment, shattered economic resilience, strangled trade, shrunk the economy, and left every single one of us poorer. The economic benefits of Brexit were only ever an illusory mirage. The kind of shimmering promise you see in the desert in the midday heat. The kind of shimmering promise that lures you towards it, only to find it always, agonisingly, out of reach. A promise that dissipates altogether as the cool of the evening returns. Well, that chill has descended. And now we can see clearly that the promises of 2016 and the oven-ready deals of 2021 were nothing more than the lukewarm figments of political opportunists who sought, and in some cases still seek, advantage in populism, in fragmentation and in fear. Far from taking back control, today our country feels more precarious than ever. We lurch from crisis to crisis, uncertain of who we are, what we stand for, and whether our children will be better off tomorrow than those who came before. Far from becoming a buccaneering global Britain, the United Kingdom is today weaker and more isolated than any point in our recent history. Far from lowering food and living costs or slashing regulation, British businesses are now buried under 2 billion bits of red tape that stretch 15 times around the circumference of the earth, all while the cost of living spirals even higher. Far from securing the transformative trading arrangements it promised, the government has delivered only Australia and New Zealand deals, worth a combined 0.1% to UK GDP, and exposing British farmers to tougher competition and diluted protections. The India deal would add just 0.13%, and the much-heralded US agreement has shrunk from a growth opportunity into damage limitation following Trump's tariffs. Meanwhile, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've erected new barriers with our largest market, the European Union, which continues to represent around half our global trade. The result? Tiny wins at the margins and a massive permanent hit at the core. That is not global Britain, nor was it ever going to be. It's economics by consolation prize, and the country is paying the price. Just last month, the National Bureau of Economic Research, a leading US think tank, published a decade-long analysis concluding that Brexit has reduced UK GDP by between 6% and 8%. The House of Commons Library shows that Brexit is now costing the Treasury up to £90 billion every single year in lost tax receipts, money that could be supporting our NHS, our defence spending and our public services. In practical terms, Madam Deputy Speaker, the average Briton today is between £2,700 and £3,700 worse off than if we had remained in the European Union. That is the reality of the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal. So let me put this plainly, Madam Deputy Speaker. The most dishonest campaign in modern British political history promised that Brexit would save £350 million a week. Instead, Brexit is now costing this country £250 million every single day. That is why we have the highest tax burden in 70 years. That is why families face sky-high bills. That is why we remain trapped in a cost-of-living crisis. This is the lived reality of the very working people the government claims to champion, but for whom it shows neither the resolve nor the political will to protect. And while the Conservative benches and those behind me may chunter, it's the former leader and Prime Minister of the Conservative Party, Sir John Major, who noted Brexit is a flop. It will not now leap up from its deathbed. The Liberal Democrats believe the most effective route to sustainable economic growth in our country is to rebuild our relationship with the European Union, our single most important trading partner. Just last week, the Prime Minister himself said, the Brexit deal has significantly hurt our economy. So for economic renewal, we must keep reducing frictions and move towards a closer relationship with the EU. That view was echoed by the Deputy Prime Minister, who described a customs union as an inevitable journey of travel. Well, my bill would propel us along that journey. It proposes a UK-EU customs union covering most goods with a formal mechanism for UK consultation on new EU trade deals that affect us. It would lift the man-made constraints that are strangling our small and medium-sized enterprises, many of which have stopped trading with Europe altogether. This bill is on the side of British business. The Federation of Small Business is clear. The greatest burdens fall on firms with the fewest resources to adapt. Crocus, one of the largest horticultural businesses in the UK, based in my Surrey Heath constituency, tell me that trade barriers are adding friction, inflating supply chain costs and causing damaging delays at our borders. Others warn British developed innovations risk being lifted and relocated to the continent. British ideas, nurtured by British universities, lost because electoral expediency was placed above economic reality. Now, even if the government stayed within their own self-defeating red lines, which merely replicate, of course, Theresa May's failed framework, a better deal with Europe could generate £25 billion extra per year for the Treasury. But the British public and British businesses want this government to go further and to go faster. At a time when ONS data shows rising numbers of young Britons leaving to work overseas, we have a national duty to support growth, to ease household pressure and give young people a compelling reason to build their futures here in the UK. As my party's former Northern Ireland spokesperson, I worked across the political divide to consider the practical implications of the Windsor framework. Red lanes, green lanes, parcel movements across the Irish Sea. These barriers still hamper our internal market. A bespoke customs union would cut costs, smooth trade and reduce daily frictions for businesses in Northern Ireland. Those who value the union should see more clearly than anyone that cooperation strengthens it far more than isolation ever could. Madam Deputy Speaker, you do not strengthen the British economy by raising barriers on the market that takes 41% of our exports. You strengthen it by removing the barriers created so a weak Prime Minister could pretend to be tough. A survey by the British Chambers of Commerce shows nearly half of exporters cite customs procedures as their biggest barrier, and 39% cite documentation complexity. The message from businesses is unambiguous: reduce friction and unleash growth. Closer economic partnership with Europe is also a matter of our national security. Russia is defined by military expansionism and destabilisation. China grows more coercive and authoritarian by the year. Under a second Trump administration, the United States has demonstrated a willingness to threaten and coerce even its closest allies in pursuit of hemispheric preeminence. In the recent national security strategy, the US welcomes, and I quote, the growing influence of patriotic European parties, and says its goal should be to help Europe correct its cultural current trajectory. A clear signal of intent to interfere in allies' domestic politics. In an increasingly fractious multipolar world, we must stand closest with those who share our values, our trade and our common security. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we are serious about lifting this country out of stagnation, then we must get Britain growing again, get Britain exporting again and make Britain competitive again. A bespoke UK-EU customs union would cut red tape, unlock investment and restore certainty to British business. To sit on our hands is to choose stagnation. To oppose this bill is to prolong the cost of living crisis. To reject it is to hold back the small and medium-sized businesses that form the backbone of our economy. This House today has a clear choice. We can remain on a path of managed decline, or we can choose a future built on growth, on confidence and on opportunity. We can unleash once again the resilience, the creativity and innovation of British business. I commend this bill to the House.
I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about the seizure of frozen assets connected to the Russian Federation, to require the Secretary of State to publish recommendations about the use of such assets to fund military reconstruction and humanitarian work in Ukraine, and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, in November 2024, my constituent Alex wrote to me. Alex is a research scientist who has lived in the UK for over 25 years. Alex is Ukrainian. At a surgery, he told me how devastated and how angry he is about the destruction of his country by Russian invaders. He also told me of his fear for his brother, who is fighting on the front lines. Alex wanted to know why Ukraine was struggling to obtain the weapons it needed to resist Russian assaults. He asked me a simple question. What more can the UK do to help my brother and my country? The truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in November 2024 there was more the UK could do. 12 months later, there is still more the UK can do. This bill sets out what the UK can do in one key area. Alex's story is one of tens of thousands just like it. We've all heard them from amazing Ukrainians who've been hosted by communities across the UK since Russia invaded. These stories speak to the horror inflicted by Vladimir Putin. The UN estimates that over 50,000 Ukrainian citizens have become casualties of Putin's war machine, including over 2,300 children wounded and over 700 killed. Tens of thousands of brave Ukrainian men and women have made the ultimate sacrifice on the front line. While some in this House, like the Honourable Member for Clacton, would prefer to be apologists for Putin, I know that I speak for most colleagues when I say that Putin alone is responsible for the atrocities we are witnessing in Ukraine. Nor is Putin content merely to devastate Ukraine today. He is hell-bent on erasing its future. His systematic programme for the abduction of at least 20,000 Ukrainian children will go down as one of the vilest acts of this war. I want to pay tribute to those colleagues who have shone a spotlight on this appalling crime. We must all commit ourselves to returning each and every Ukrainian child to their home. Madam Deputy Speaker, Putin's ambitions stretch beyond Ukraine. In the Baltics, Russia poses an existential threat to our Lithuanian, Estonian and Latvian allies, all of whom face daily cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. In the Caucasus, Putin's cronies and the Georgian Dream Party have cracked down violently on democracy activists, while the Kremlin's insidious efforts to distort elections in Moldova and Romania are well documented. Putin also wages a campaign of sabotage and cyber war across the rest of Europe, including here at home. Confirmation over the weekend that the RAF will now be deployed to defend Belgian airspace against Russian drone threats speaks to the collective nature of the threat we face. Putin's imperial ambitions are extensive. That is why we must be unwavering in our support to the Ukrainian people. The UK has stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. It was led by all three Prime Ministers in the previous government and has been sustained by the present government. Across that time with support from nearly all parties in this House, and we should be proud of that legacy. In providing weapons, equipment and fighter pilot training, we have helped keep Ukraine in the fight. Our leadership in G7 efforts to crack down on Russian oil revenues has been vital in cutting Putin's profits, although Liberal Democrats continue to call on the government to go further to ensure that no actors in the UK economy can facilitate the sale of Russian gas. We are also pushing the government to explain why over £30 million worth of Russian planes were imported to the UK last year. Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain's contribution has been crucial, but we cannot rest on those laurels. Rather, we must double down on our support. Last month, Ukraine's Defence Minister Denis Shmyhal laid out the challenge. He estimated that Ukraine will need to spend $120 billion on defence in 2026, of which Ukraine itself can cover half. That leaves a $60 billion hole, which Ukraine's allies have a duty to help fill. For many months, Liberal Democrats have called on the government to fund Ukraine's defence through seizing frozen Russian assets across the UK. The most recent estimates suggest that £300 billion worth of Russian assets are frozen across G7 countries, which includes close to £30 billion here in the UK. Seizing the UK-based assets could allow us to fill half of the projected deficit in Ukraine's required defence spend for next year, while ensuring that Putin and his cronies are the ones who pay. We could help turbocharge Ukraine's deep strike capabilities whilst bolstering the supply of air defence systems. In short, we could provide Ukraine with a vital new lifeline of support. So we find ourselves today at a critical point. Ukraine's need for finance is urgent. The UK's efforts to move the G7 and particularly EU allies have not yet resulted in success. At the same time, one very specific item allied to this topic highlights the frustrations felt by so many in this House. In May 2022, the Conservative government announced that they had, and I quote, agreed a deed of undertaking with Roman Abramovich. They said, again to quote, he committed the proceeds to a charity in a jurisdiction agreed by the government for the purposes of helping victims of the war in Ukraine. In common with other members, I have asked ministers about these funds. On the 24th of January, the 17th of March and the 21st of May, the Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Office Minister in his place told me that they were, to quote, redoubling our efforts, doing everything I can and working at pace. Yet still, over 3.5 years on, there is no progress towards releasing the £2.3 million, suggesting an alarming lack of either resolve or creativity from successive governments. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am keenly aware of the arguments raised against seizing Russia's frozen assets. The primary concern is that a direct seizure creates the possibility of litigious action by the Kremlin. The second is that by acting against Russia, we might inadvertently undermine wider confidence in the UK as a safe haven for financial assets. In response to the legal risks, the actions of the US in adopting the Repo Act and of Canada in adopting the CIMA Act demonstrate that other allies believe it is possible to legislate effectively to allow for asset seizures. And on the financial risks, I quote the previous Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, who said in March 2024, I think that the economic case is very strong. Here we are in the City of London, one of the great financial centres of the world. I do not think that using that money will disadvantage us in any way. I am conscious too that these concerns have inspired important efforts in Brussels. These have aimed at securing Europe-wide agreement on proposals which would allow for the use of frozen assets, whilst reassuring Belgium in particular, where the majority of frozen assets are held, that the legal risk will be both reduced and shared. While I welcome these efforts at securing international consensus, those proposals have stalled. And with each day that passes without concrete action to unleash the potential of the assets, Putin's war machine makes further progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, last month we learnt that, shamefully, an elected UK MEP, Nathan Gill, took payment from a Russian agent, Olay Voloshin, to repeat pro-Russian propaganda in the European Parliament. Shame. Mr Gill sat in the European Parliament with party colleagues who now sit in this House. It is for the Honourable Member for Clacton to explain his meetings with Mr Voloshin's wife, and for the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness to explain his public support for Mr Gill in 2019, and his more recent hospitality from Vladimir and Lyubov Chernukin. But I know that the overwhelming majority of colleagues in this House, just like the constituents we all represent, want us to provide the brave men and women of Ukraine with the funds they need to defend themselves. I am proud to present this bill on a cross-party basis and grateful to my co-sponsors and other members who have shown their support. Madam Deputy Speaker, 13 months later, I am still motivated by Alex's question. I am no longer prepared to tell him that it is very hard or that Belgium is cautious. This has become a question of will. The time for delay and timidity is over. I believe it is the will of this House to legislate so that the UK can lead our G7 and EU partners in seizing Russian state assets here in the UK and in making them available to Ukraine. Ukraine needs her friends to step forward with urgency and purpose. She needs our financial support today so that she can purchase the military materiel to drive back the Russians and defend her sovereign territory. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I urge the Government to show leadership towards our European and G7 allies and to work with colleagues from across the House to enact this bill.
I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about screening for neurodiversion in primary school-aged children, to make provision about teacher training related to neurodiversion and for connective purposes. I'd like to thank honourable members across this House for their support and thank the Right Honourable former member for West Suffolk for bringing forward similar bills in the past. School for me was hard, that's putting it lightly. Dyslexia meant that reading and writing was challenging. Words seemed to float all over the page. In fact, they're doing so right now. So please bear with me through this speech. I'm likely to make some mistakes. ADHD meant that concentrating was a nightmare, with the slightest thing pulling my attention away. I believed that school wasn't for me. I fell behind, I was bullied, and I certainly acted out. I'm not alone in this. Since I started campaigning, I've heard from so many people who struggle, from constituents to celebrities like Jamie Oliver, who is a great advocate in this area. I wish I could share them all today, but we would be here for many days. Around 1 in 7 people in the UK has what we might call neurodivergence. It is a non-medical umbrella term describing the ways people's brains may develop or work differently from the norm. In some ways, we are all neurodivergent to a greater or lesser extent. Neurodivergence is not a weakness, or a condition, or a flaw. I want to make that crystal clear. But in other ways, it's a superpower, and you can do anything you want with the right support. I definitely have with what I've done today. We are problem solvers, critical thinkers, and fantastic curators. But with these strengths comes challenges like reading, writing, social skills, or maths. This does not mean there is anything wrong with you. It just means you learn and understand things differently and might need to be supported in different ways from others. I was lucky at school. I was identified, and I got the support I needed. That is why I'm standing here today. That support gave me the confidence and the fight for what I believe in. Getting into politics and into this place was certainly not on my agenda at school, but I feel I have to do all I can to make sure everyone in communities like Yeovil and beyond get the help I had in school or better. Despite all the progress our country have made in recognising, empowering neurodiverse people, and our amazing educators working their socks off, believe me, they do, things seem to have gotten worse. In places like Somerset, since I was at school, our schools are under-resourced, under-supported, and local authorities are totally underfunded. Whilst we have the phonics screener, this test does not cover all areas of neurodiverse people may struggle with and need support, like attention control and working memory. Evidence also suggests that neurodiverse children can just memorise the words for the test, meaning their actual needs be overlooked. That's one of their superpowers. Even when a child needs identify, there is no proper designated SEND training in additional teacher training or continued professional development programmes, nor is there for teaching assistants. So our overworked teaching staff are pretty much left to get on with it themselves, and this is not good enough. While some schools do manage and do fantastically, particularly when they are properly funded, others are struggling. In some ways, it's another one of those postcode lotteries we hear so much about on a daily basis. Our children, our families, and our teachers, they deserve better. That is why I'm introducing this bill today. It's not complicated, you'll be pleased to know. In fact, the idea behind it is fairly simple. It's about getting the government to use its resources and knowledge to bring everyone together to act, so we can create a system to better identify neurodivergence and support children early on. What I am proposing can be broken into 3 parts, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, we need to define what we are introducing, universal screening and teacher training on. So before this Act can come into effect, the Secretary of State must lay a report before this House that defines neurodivergence. Secondly, we need a programme of universal screening for neurodivergence in primary school-aged children. This would preferably be a light-touch, teacher-led process. Like I said, we all sit on the spectrum of neurodiverse in some ways, no matter what others say. So screening should not be about labels, but creating a profile of strengths and weakness. This will help teachers identify where all the people sit on the spectrum of neurodivergence and what level of support they need, from in-classroom adjustments to non-formal referrals. Finally, we need a proper teaching training. The Secretary of State must produce statutory guidance on training for teachers on neurodivergence, in initial teacher training and continual professional development. This should be for all teaching staff. This training should provide teaching staff with a clear understanding of neurodivergence, knowledge of how it presents differently in different people, and the tools and resources to support pupils. I do not want Mr. Bill to be about forcing labels on young people. That won't help. Again, it is about helping teachers identify all their people's strengths and weaknesses. It is not about forcing costly screeners on schools either, the government will be pleased to know. While I'm not set out a preference, the universal Classroom have worked with teachers to create a universal screening that will be free. So this won't break the bank. Most importantly, it is not about putting more burdens onto our fantastic teachers. I personally believe teachers do far too much for far too little pay, support or thanks. I urge the government to look at the NEU's list of 23 admin tasks that teachers should not be doing. It is about empowering teachers to do what they signed up for and care deeply about, educating and supporting all their pupils. To go back to the universal classroom screening, it only takes 5 to 10 minutes per pupil. With the profiles from a screener like that and better training, all our teachers will have the confidence to make the right adjustments for each child in their class. Because even small things like different paper, extra time, time-out cards can make life-changing differences. I know this too well. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, what I'm proposing today is no silver bullet. It has to go alongside other changes in education. If the government would rather take on the measures I set out in their upcoming white paper or some other legislation, fine, I don't really care. All that matters is that we get on with it, enough debating, enough promises. Let's bring everyone together, roll up our sleeves and take the next steps to making education inclusive and accessible for every child. Thank you.
I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about a cap on political donations, to make provision for a review to recommend the level at which such a cap should be set and to consider the impact of such a cap, to make provision about political donations made by foreign nationals through companies and for connected purposes. This is a bill that will take big money out of British politics, protect our democracy from foreign interference and restore public trust in our electoral system. For too long, our politics have been exposed. It is far too easy for those who do not have the national interests of our country at heart, who have made their wealth through illicit means, to funnel money into British politics. This bill is simple in its aims, to ensure that it is the people of this country, not the deep pockets of foreign billionaires, oligarchs or corporate interests, who decide our country's future in elections and referendums. Madam Deputy Speaker, trust in our political system is faltering. Many people look at our politics and they see a system rigged in favour of the rich and powerful. A recent poll by YouGov found that over 2/3 of the British public supports a limit on political donations. Not-for-profit organisations such as Unlock Democracy, Spotlight on Corruption and Fair Vote recommend swift action to tighten electoral finance legislation or else risk democratic backsliding. The message is clear. People want change. We want big money kicked out of politics. Yet, under our current system, there is no limit on what a single individual or business can donate. This is not democracy. This is a bidding war for influence, ripe for exploitation by oligarchs and foreign billionaires. Look at the mess this has resulted in. Just over a month ago, people across Britain recoiled in horror to read the news that US billionaire Elon Musk planned to donate an uncapped amount of money to reform. If he were to follow through on this plan, we would be powerless to stop him. And most alarming were past donations to the Conservative Party by individuals linked to the Russian government. This isn't just about fairness, it's about national security. Britain has long prided itself on being a beacon of democracy, but we must not be complacent. Our political financial regulations have glaring loopholes that are open for exploitation by foreign money, funneled through UK-registered companies, opaque financial networks and questionable donors. Malign actors who do not share our values of tolerance, liberty and the rule of law should not have unrestricted access to our democracy. We know that hostile states seek to undermine democracies all the time. We have seen it in cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. Yet, our political finance laws remain riddled with loopholes that allow foreign and dark money to shape British politics. This bill seeks to close those gaps, ensuring that our elections and referendums belong to the voters, not foreign interests. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill seeks to deliver two fair, necessary and overdue changes. First, it will introduce a fair cap on political donations as determined by a review. Second, it will close British politics to the influence of foreign money by preventing foreign donors from funding our politics. These are essential measures that must be brought into effect. We must protect our elections from manipulation and ensure further transparency in political funding. In doing so, we will help to restore faith in our democracy and introduce vital safeguards for our political institutions. There is already a consensus in this House that foreign donations have no place in British politics, but there are gaps in the law that allow this to happen. We must act now to close the legal loopholes that allow them to flow unchecked. We in this House have a responsibility to uphold the integrity of our democracy. It is our duty to drive the change our country needs. Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain has always been a nation that stands for fairness, democracy and integrity. It is time we take a firm stand against undue influence in our politics and ensure that our democracy serves the people. This bill is not radical. It is reasonable, necessary and long overdue. It will ensure that political influence isn't bought, but earned through genuine public support. Introducing a cap on political donations isn't about limiting participation. It's about making sure that every vote, every voice, and every citizen matters equally in our political system. Let us give back control of British politics to our constituents, not to unaccountable tech billionaires or those who seek to buy influence. Let us renew our commitment to an open and fair democracy, one that belongs to the people of this country, now and for generations to come. Thank you.
I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to lay before Parliament any trade agreements between the UK and the USA, which the government proposes to implement, to prohibit the implementation of such an agreement without the approval by resolution of each House, and to make provision for the amendment of such agreements by Parliament and for connected purposes. Let's cast our minds back 4 years to the spring of 2021. Liz Truss was the Secretary of State for International Trade. Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. The export of British goods to the EU had fallen sharply in January of that year, and the end of the Brexit transition period was nigh. The government was in a hurry. Boris Johnson sat down for dinner with the Australian Prime Minister here in Westminster. After 3 hours of small talk, a little negotiation and plenty of Australian red wine, Johnson agreed to remove tariffs on over 99% of Australian products entering the UK, including beef. The government knew that such a deal would harm UK agriculture and food industries. The government's own analysis predicted that the deal could leave the UK sectors in agriculture and food £278 million worse off. The Australian High Commissioner, who had been sitting at the table, moved quickly, scribbling down Johnson's generous pledge. He excused himself to go to the toilet, and the High Commissioner handed a note to an aide as he did so. Within minutes, it was scanned, turned into a formal trade document, printed and slipped into an official-looking folder. The High Commissioner then casually walked back into the dinner, carrying the so-called deal. That was all it took to sell out the UK's farmers. A wine-soaked dinner, a hastily scribbled note, and a signature from a Prime Minister prepared to ignore the good advice of his own trade negotiators. Without proper parliamentary scrutiny and a vote on any deal with the United States, we risk adding pressure to our already struggling farmers, stripping away safeguards on British citizens' data and sidelining democratic scrutiny itself. Currently, parliamentary scrutiny of international treaties in the UK is woefully inadequate. The government can negotiate and sign a treaty with another country, even one as significant as the US, using prerogative powers without having to put it to a vote in Parliament. Under the existing Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, or CRAG, signed treaties must be laid before Parliament for 21 sitting days. Parliament can raise objections, but it cannot propose amendments, and there is no requirement for a vote. Recommendations born of scrutiny are advisory
and not in the least bit binding. Evidence was provided to the International Agreements Committee in the other place last year. It showed just how outdated the UK's treaty scrutiny system is, set against how trade agreements have evolved and become more complicated. Modern trade deals now reach deep into domestic policy. They shape our food standards, our data rights, even the regulation of AI. If backbench MPs are shut out of the process, so too are the people who we represent. Parliamentary scrutiny was demonstrably weak in the wake of the UK's trade deals with Australia and New Zealand. The International Trade Committee condemned the government's approach, saying it undermines scrutiny. The Johnson government did this by triggering the 21 sitting-day statutory period before committees received evidence or completed reports on the trade deal. This meant that Parliament had little information with which to assess the agreements. When the Australia deal was signed, Labour, then in opposition, rightly demanded a parliamentary vote. Now in government, they would do well to heed their own previous calls for proper scrutiny. In East and Mid Devon, farmers who I represent have been hit hard by the poorly negotiated trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, which are on top of the planned changes to inheritance tax and the peremptory closure of the sustainable farming incentive. Even if a future US-UK deal upholds our food standards, West Country farmers and others could still be undermined. The government offers assurances about shutting out hormone-treated beef and chlorinated chicken, but concerns remain that the US could still flood the UK market with beef that is not hormone-treated. The government has assured us that there will be no compromise on environmental and animal welfare standards in the UK. But again, these assurances count for little if imports from overseas are not produced to the same environmental standards and are not produced with the same high requirements for high animal welfare. The UK is already too reliant on imported food. Imports made up about 40% of the UK's food supply in 2023, down from 78% in 1984, where we had 78% self-sufficiency. We've now just, got to just 60% self-sufficiency today. There are those who say that some sectors will always fall victim to trade negotiations, that government must balance the demands of various industries. But some of the factors being discussed currently by our trade negotiators are cross-cutting, and that includes matters of digital trade and data. The US wants a digital-first deal. That would mean locking in rules that protect the interests of Silicon Valley, not the British public. It is already speculated that the government is considering reducing or scrapping the digital services tax, which could cut taxes for some of the wealthiest and most powerful American companies in the world at the expense of the users of public services here in the UK. The OBR forecasts that this tax raised £700 million in 24-25, revenue that the Treasury can ill afford to forfeit at this time. Vice President J.D. Vance alleged in a speech at the Munich Security Conference that, I quote, "Old, entrenched interests are hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation." That sort of brand of free speech pays little heed to facts. Vance may be representing some not altogether transparent interests himself. The US is pushing to overcome data localization. This could allow the US to have its US-based tech firms centralize their data operations in the United States and rule out the data storage here in the UK. If that came about, it could weaken the protection for British citizens' data, making it difficult to enforce UK privacy laws. Take as an example the contract that Palantir agreed with the NHS in 2023 to install their federated data system. If a US-UK trade deal was to restrict data localization, it could allow NHS medical records to be exported to the US, handing Palantir the power to exploit the enormous commercial value of British citizens' data. Although Palantir claims it will only act as a processor of data, its business model is rooted in extracting value from data for commercial ends. With access to one of the world's richest health data sets, Palantir could potentially package insights. It could sell predictive analytics services to private healthcare providers, to insurers, and to pharmaceutical companies. Palantir's co-founder, Peter Thiel, has called the NHS a system that makes people sick. He claims that freedom and democracy are no longer compatible. Parliament should have the means to ensure that Thiel's understanding of freedom cannot bypass British democracy. This isn't just about trade, it's about trust. The Leader of the Opposition should know. The Right Honourable Member for North West Essex was the Secretary of State for International Trade in 2023 when the Australia and New Zealand trade deals came into effect. Farming paid the price last time, and it could happen again. Additionally, our digital freedoms could pay the price too. This bill is simple. It doesn't block a US deal. It doesn't tie the government's hands. It requires that Parliament has a greater say. That's what democracy demands, and that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is what the public expects. Thank you.
I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to enter into negotiations with countries which are members of the European Union for the purpose of extending the Youth Mobility Scheme to applicants from those countries on a reciprocal basis and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, the immense damage caused by the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal is clear for all to see. Few thought that young people would be able to go for 2 years to live and work all the way over in Japan, but not be able to hop across the Channel and do the same in France. I'm not sure anyone voted for that kind of increased bureaucracy back in 2016. This bill gives us the chance to send a different message to a generation of young people who have been denied the opportunities that so many of us in this chamber took for granted growing up. If we wanted to take a job or go and study in an EU country, then we could just go and do it. Opportunity and hope for the future have rarely been in such short supply in this country. This is how we can provide some of both. What I am proposing here is a pragmatic, defined scheme that will once again allow young people across the UK to be able to spend time with our nearest neighbours without having to navigate a tangle of Brexit red tape. A youth mobility scheme with the EU that would open up opportunities for British young people to learn new skills, languages and cultures and bring all of that back with them to benefit our economy and our society.
Will you wait?
This would not... Yes.
Oh. There was a 10-minute, as you know, speaking limit. Please. No.
Okay, sorry. Okay. This would not be the UK's only reciprocal youth mobility scheme. We have such arrangements in place already with Australia, Japan, New Zealand and Canada. It's familiar, tried and tested, allowing those aged 18 to 30 to live, work and study for a set period. The government has made much of its so-called missions. Mission number 1, we're told, economic growth. Yet any proposal that might involve our European neighbours and contribute to boosting growth is dismissed. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK is facing acute labour shortages, particularly in key sectors like hospitality. These are exactly the kinds of jobs that young people visiting the UK for a few years might take on, whether while studying, immersing themselves in our culture or improving their grasp of our language. It suggests that this is a government that is not serious about making the practical, hard-headed choices that would greatly benefit the UK economy and labour market in the long term, stimulating growth and improving the lives of British people. The government also talks up its reset with the EU. This, so far at least, seems to involve little more than warm words and a continuation of the previous government's attitude towards closer cooperation with the EU as a threat rather than a considerable opportunity to make Britain more secure and prosperous. Indeed, they have stuck so closely to the Conservative Party's script, or is it Reform UK's script, that ministers have even mischaracterised a youth mobility scheme with the EU as a return to freedom of movement, repeatedly in fact. That is categorically not what is being proposed here. Any scheme would be time-limited and involve a restricted cohort of eligible people. I truly hope the government will seriously reconsider its short-sighted and self-defeating position on the issue. A number of honourable members from across this House have rightly asked ministers directly for an explanation about their refusal to explore such a scheme. Yet, no one has given a response that makes any sense at all. Meanwhile, the government has tied itself up in unnecessary red lines on Europe that do nothing to boost growth or support British businesses and young people. And even that cannot be used as an excuse, as this proposal does not breach any of those red lines. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is having a real impact on young people growing up in this country today. Let me share with you Alex's story. A bright and ambitious 25-year-old from Taunton, Alex left university last year with the aim of working in a German fintech startup. He had planned to move to Germany for a few years, then return home with a better understanding of the German language and with the knowledge and skills to launch his own startup here in the UK, but the hurdles proved insurmountable. He told me, "I didn't want to move there forever. I just wanted a year, maybe two, to earn invaluable experience, polish my language skills and get to know the German culture." But with no simple mobility arrangement in place between the UK and the EU, Alex ended up shelving his plans. Not only did Alex lose out, but our economy lost out too. The government's failure to act risks closing the world to a whole generation of Alexes across the UK. It is also holding back British growth and prosperity. Let's take the UK's £82.5 billion tourism sector as an example. It has been grappling with the impact of the failure of the last government to address youth mobility with the EU. ABTA, a trade body representing the sector, reported a 69% drop in UK nationals working in European tourism roles in the 5 years after the EU referendum. Businesses that once offered transformative opportunities to young Britons now face rising costs and critical staffing shortages. I've heard from one UK-based tourism company that what's employed over 400 young Britons a year. Mobility restrictions have forced them to drastically scale back their operations, undermining years of competitive advantage and slashing training and employment opportunities for young UK workers. European pubs, who run bars and restaurants in France, previously relied on UK staff for most seasonal roles. Today, only 50% of their workforce is British. A youth mobility scheme, which recent polling shows is backed by a clear majority of British voters, could ease labour shortages, provide essential career pathways, and help to safeguard our tourism sector's future vitality. Meanwhile, our small and medium-sized businesses are really struggling, especially in sectors where staff shortages have become acute. Sectors from hospitality to arts and entertainment to retail are desperately short of staff, and with the UK's ageing population, this is unlikely to improve in the future. A youth mobility scheme offers British businesses an excellent opportunity to address staffing shortages by welcoming young people from EU countries for a limited period, bringing fresh talent and energy to our workforce. With the threat of tariffs coming from the incoming President of the United States, it has never been more important for our government to break down barriers to opportunity elsewhere. When speaking with counterparts in Brussels in my capacity as the Liberal Democrats Europe spokesperson, I've been struck by a clear message. After years of attempts to cherry-pick, the UK now needs to show it is once again a trusted and reliable partner. By taking the lead on a youth mobility scheme, we have an opportunity to build that trust with our European allies to allow us to explore our other priorities. Without this, Britain's ability to strike new deals in defence, agriculture and trade will falter. If we send the signal that we are unwilling to move on a pragmatic, mutually beneficial scheme like this. A carefully defined youth mobility scheme would give the British people control. It would ensure participants could only come under a clearly defined category and tightly controlled time limit, while also signalling that we value cultural exchange, business growth and an ongoing partnership with our nearest neighbours. Let's be honest, we can't afford to keep letting down young people like Alex. Nor can we keep small businesses in limbo, forcing them to cope with staff shortages, when a scheme like this can do so much to help. Young people in this country are already facing unprecedented challenges. A housing crisis, low salary growth, a rising cost of living and high taxes on income. The very least the government could do is remove barriers preventing young people in the UK from living and working in the rest of Europe. And so it saddens me that the government have so far ruled it out. I call on the government to give the young people of this country a proper explanation. Many of them put their faith in the Labour Party to reverse the damage done by the previous government, but remain disappointed and frustrated. This bill calls for a solution that restores vital opportunities for our young people who've been left high and dry by the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal. By embracing a well-structured and controlled youth mobility scheme, we will send a powerful message that this country is serious about supporting our young people and backing British business with the labour force it needs to grow. This is a moment to bring opportunity and renewed goodwill back to the heart of UK-EU relations, a real reset. The issue will not go away, and as a Liberal Democrat, I am proud to have sponsors for this bill from the Green Party, SNP, Plaid Cymru and the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland. I know that there will be many on the Labour and Conservative benches who know that a youth mobility scheme with the EU is the right thing to do. It is time to rebuild our relationship with Europe and set our young people free. I commend this House to the bill.
The Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about the Groceries Code Adjudicator, to require coordination between the Groceries Code Adjudicator and the Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator, to make provision about public procurement in respect of British food products, to make provision about the labelling of food products, and for connected purposes. I also remind the House of my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Mr. Speaker, in March 1917, at the height of the First World War, then Prime Minister David Lloyd George sent a letter to an Orkney farmer, Charles Patterson. He wrote, "In the nation's interests, I urge you, at whatever personal sacrifice, to overcome all obstacles, to throw your fullest energies into the work, and to influence and encourage all who assist you, so that every possible acre shall be sown." At that time, there was no question at the heart of government about the vital importance of farmers in the Isles and across the country. In the centuries since, farmers have continued to play their part in supplying the nation's table, but their incomes have stagnated. The market for agricultural produce in the UK has not been a free market since at least the end of the Second World War. Successive governments have intervened through the payment of public subsidies to farmers, initially in the name of food security and more recently in the name of cheap food for consumers. That intervention has over the years distorted the market and allowed a range of unfair practices to be hardwired into the system. As a consequence, the market today has a handful of behemoth retailers, the supermarkets at the top, hundreds of thousands of farmers at the bottom, and a variety of processors, distributors and others in the middle. Everyone takes their cut, and then, at the end of it all, the farmers get whatever's left. The power imbalance between the supermarkets at the top and farmers at the bottom is more pronounced than any other market that I can think of, and it is well documented that those at the top who have the power wield it to their own advantage. Mr. Speaker, the extensive debate that we've had in this House in recent months has laid bare the shocking truth about the lack of profitability in farming. Just last week, a new report from the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission found that real incomes for farmers have stayed stock still for the past 50 years. Shortly after the autumn budget, a group of younger farmers in my constituency came to see me and brought with them their farm accounts. They were despondent in pointing out to me that their businesses earned a net profit of 0.7% on their capital. They were not even much cheered when I pointed out that they were doing better than many of their contemporaries, as DEFRA figures say the average return is as low as 0.5%. One of those farmers was the great-grandson of Charles Patterson, a seventh-generation farmer who works the same land as his great-grandfather. You really could not ask for a better illustration of the shift in priorities of our governments over the past 100 years. Mr. Speaker, this cannot go on. Farmers are seeing a rapid withdrawal of funding support. In England, the accelerated withdrawal of basic payments, followed by the closure without notice last week of the sustainable farming incentives, has left many farms desperately worried about the viability of their businesses. Elsewhere in the United Kingdom, the removal of the ring fence of money given to devolved administrations for agricultural payments leaves farmers feeling they are vulnerable to adverse change. That is why this market now needs direct and meaningful intervention. Without it, we risk losing domestic food production and any notion of food security. If, as the Prime Minister says, food security is national security, then his government should act urgently to allow our farmers to get a fair price for the food that they produce. I was in government when the Groceries Code Adjudicator was set up. I don't think that anyone believed that the GCA would be the last word in regulation of the food supply chain, but we all took the view that it was better to have something than to have nothing. 12 years on from its creation, the limitations of the adjudicator are apparent for all to see. The office has fewer than 10 staff, all seconded from other public bodies, and it is funded by a levy on supermarkets. And expect an operation of that size to take on some of the largest retail businesses in the country is laughable. It's hardly surprising, then, that businesses supplying supermarkets are reluctant to make complaint, especially when the office itself has not issued a single fine in the entirety of its existence. Such cases as are pursued end up with settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Since publicising my bill, I have spoken to a number of producers who have told me about their experience at the hands of supermarkets. Just yesterday, I spoke to a businessman who had been a supplier of Brussels sprouts to a large supermarket. His company had, on the basis of undertakings made to it by the retailer, invested significantly in their business, borrowing £400,000 to build a state-of-the-art packing facility. In the year 2022 to 23, this one supermarket accounted for 47% of their business. Then, in February 2023, they were told by the supermarket that their supply was no longer wanted for that season. For that business, the news was a hammer blow, and despite it being a prima facie breach of the Groceries Code, Supply Code of Practice, the GCA initially declined to intervene. Now, I would love to say that this was an isolated incident, but the GCA annual survey conducted by YouGov suggests that it is not. 42% of suppliers would not raise issues because they believed that the retailer would find out and there would be consequences. The experiences that they describe include delisting without reasonable notice, undisputed invoices not being paid according to agreed terms, retrospective changes to supply agreements, running a promotional activity at the supplier's expense, not the retailer's, and much more. Practice among supermarkets shows a wide variety of behaviours. 7 of the retailers were judged to have improved or at least stayed the same, with Sainsbury's coming out on top with a net improvement score of 10.34%. Unfortunately, 7 others, including Home Bargains, Asda, Tesco, Ocado, Iceland, Morrisons and Amazon, were scored as having worsened by varying degrees, with Amazon's performance being judged to have worsened by a whopping 21.38%. Amazon was also scored as having complied with the code consistently or mostly only 46.96% of the time. Mr. Speaker, yesterday's Daily Telegraph reported that Asda was threatening a price war in order to regain market share that they had lost in recent years. For farmers, that is a chilling prospect. If supermarkets are about to embark on a race to the bottom, then we can be pretty sure that it will be farmers, not company executives or shareholders, who will be expected to take the hit. Mr. Speaker, it is not for us in Parliament to pick a winner in a fight between supermarkets, but they should know that we are watching. And any supermarket that thinks it can rebuild its balance sheet on the back of Britain's farmers might find themselves in front of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, they had better have some good answers when they get here. My bill has support from MPs across the political parties. It's sponsored by members from the Liberal Democrats, Labour, Conservative, Plaid Cymru, SNP, Green and Democratic Unionist Party. It also has wide geographical support. It has sponsors from Shetland to Cornwall and across the 4 nations that make up the United Kingdom. I am grateful for the support I have received from the farming unions, the Country Land and Business Association, Scottish Land and Estates, the Senate Farmers Association and the Countryside Alliance. This is a quite remarkable coalition of people who all understand that if we fail to act now, then before too long there may be no industry left to protect. Charles Patterson's family in Orkney is still working the same land to this day. And if we want to keep farming communities alive for generations to come, however, we need to act now to make it happen. That is why, Mr. Speaker, this bill is necessary and why I seek the leave of the House today to introduce it.